Hello and happy Earth Day, everyone. My name is Rob LaRue. I'm the president of National Farmers Union, and I'm really happy to have you all join us to celebrate the occasion. In recent years, it may seem like Earth Day can be a bit of a bittersweet event, given some of the significant environmental challenges that we're all facing right now. But despite that, I don't think, or we shouldn't lose track of the good work that actors all across the food chain are already doing to address the climate crisis and the many opportunities we have to make progress. Today, from the White House and all across the country, there's been a renewed commitment to make a difference, and farmers and everyone along the food chain are committed to doing their part. So today, we're bringing together some of these advocates to discuss the challenges they're facing. We'll hear about the actions they're taking to build resilience and minimize their climate impact, and what support they need to build on those efforts. To start out with, I want to give each of our speakers an opportunity to introduce themselves and explain the work they do in the food and agriculture sector. First up, let's meet Hannah Bernhardt, a rancher from Medicine Creek Farm in Minnesota. Hannah is also a member of National Farmers Union's Climate Change Policy Advisory Panel. Hannah, could you give us just a few minutes introduction?
Hi, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. Again, my name is Hannah Bernhardt. I'm the owner-operator of Medicine Creek Farm in northeastern Minnesota. I raise 100% grass-fed and finished beef and lamb, as well as pastured pork, which is fed organic grain. And we are on 160 acres up here in Minnesota's Northwoods. And as such, we also use livestock guardian dogs for predator protection, as we are in wolf territory. And a part of that is that we also now breed puppies, which we sell to other grass-based operations. And, we're proud that we're able to farm alongside thriving wildlife here. We direct market all of our meat through mostly our website and social media, and we do deliveries within Minnesota to our primarily urban consumer base. But I did grow up on a corn and soybean farm in southern Minnesota, and I would say that I really only came back to agriculture when I saw new economic opportunities outside of commodity markets for farmers. And, that really is the direct marketing that we do. But also when I learned more about soil health and regenerative agriculture and the ability to actually improve our environment with agriculture. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Hannah. Next up, we have Ryan Goodman, a rancher at Crescent Red Angus Ranch in Colorado. Ryan.
Yes, thank you very much, and glad to be here today. So I'm Ryan Goodman. I am based in northern Colorado, not far from Cheyenne, Wyoming, out on the high plains, very dry and arid environment. I'm on a seed stock, red Angus operation, and we have a commercial feed yard as well. I actually grew up in central Arkansas on my family's diversified and progressive cow-calf and stocker operation. We had commercial cattle and retained ownership on those cattle into the feed yard. So from a very young age, I was exposed to different sectors of the industry. And in fact, the only vacations that we ever had was driving to Amarillo, Texas for spring break to look at our cattle in the feed yards out in the Panhandle region. So cattle ranching has been something that I definitely have been around my entire life. When I left high school, though, I knew that I needed to broaden my experiences because no two places raise cattle the same. Agriculture is very diverse across the country. So I've taken several opportunities to experience agriculture across the country. I went to school at Oklahoma State University and University of Tennessee, focusing on nutrition and reproduction in cattle. And then through that, I worked in several different sectors for some small family operations that raise beef for natural beef programs. And then I've worked in some very large and some of the largest cattle feeding operations in the country in the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles. And I made my way up in the Rocky Mountain region working on ranches and with organizations, membership organizations in Wyoming and Montana. But for the last decade, I've been working, not only working on the ranch and working with farmers and ranchers across the country, but I'm working in advocacy and communication efforts. So trying to get outside of the bubble of our agriculture sphere and agriculture community and really try to listen to what consumers are asking and the conversations that they're having, and helping farmers and ranchers in our community to be stronger at telling our stories, to be the advocates for ourselves, and helping to answer those questions from consumers. And so I've been very active online and helping and coaching different producers and being able to do that alongside working daily in an operation to do that as well. So thank you all very much for having me here. And I look forward to sharing some of my experiences working not only on my family's operations and the operations I'm on now, but also the experiences working with farmers and ranchers of all different sizes across the country.
All righty. Thanks so much, Ryan. And as part of today's webinar is, again, kind of looking at a cross-section of the food chain here, from the ranch level through processing and to the customer. Our next panelist here is Andy Shaw. He's the CEO at Cypress Valley Meat Company and Natural State Processing in Arkansas and Oklahoma. Andy, if you could give us a little introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to be on the panel today. I am Andy Shaw, the CEO of Cypress Valley Meat Company, Natural State Processing. We have 6 facilities in Arkansas and Oklahoma, and 1 in Oklahoma. We process large animals and poultry, so primarily beef, pork, bison, and we do chicken and turkey as well. We have we're a services company, so we're not a sales company, but we process for about 2,700 farmers in Arkansas and surrounding states. And, we're very passionate about the farmers that we get to work with, because, we're a strategic partner with them, helping them get their product to market. And we're working with farmers that are very passionate about the regenerative and sustainable ag space. So we are able to be the link there for them to get products.
All righty. Thanks, Andy. And then finally today, it's my pleasure to introduce Anthony Mint, who is the Director of Partnerships at Zero Footprint in California. Anthony, welcome. And if you could give us a brief introduction of you and your operation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thanks to all the great land stewards out there. Happy Earth Day. Zero Footprint is a nonprofit that is the 2020 Humanitarian of the Year as named by James Beard Foundation. And we lead public-private collaborations with state agencies in California, the California Resource Conservation Districts, and also in Denver and Boulder, to basically lead a circular economy where consumers are able to send a few cents per meal or purchase directly toward regenerative practices on local farms and ranches. My background is as a chef through a restaurant called Mission Chinese Food, which began as a pop-up before that even was a term, and then miraculously won New York Times Restaurant of the Year in 2012. Since then, we also opened a restaurant called The Perennial, championing regenerative ag. But after a while, we started to realize that we needed more systemic change than was possible from consumers making good choices and paying an extra dollar once in a while. So really, this effort is geared towards systemic change, allowing, basically every purchase to be part of the climate solution through healthy soil.
All right. Well, thank you. And as you've heard, we have this kind of diverse voices today from the farm through to the consumer. We want to have a lively discussion about all the challenges that each of these particular spaces has as they look forward, not only with current kind of climate challenges, but those that are going to be getting more severe, whether that is weather program challenges or challenges with transportation or other pieces of the food, complicated food chain there. You will also notice, I think, as we go through today's discussion, that there are a number of parallels between the challenges that the farm and food space had in responding to the shifts in the as a result of the pandemic, and this renewed call for a resilience throughout the entire food space. This resilience, as we all know, is all the more important as we look to the future, not only for future events like the pandemic, but certainly for the challenges that we're facing that including climate change here. But I want to start off here with some questions about the ways that climate change is affecting the meat supply chain from farm to fork. And Hannah, we'd like to start with you. So ranchers are already experiencing, as we know, the effects of climate change. But what the list looks like varies significantly depending on the region. In Minnesota, it might be increasingly frequent and severe flooding, one of the most immediate consequences. But can you explain this or other challenges and what this means for you, your cattle, your ranch, and what steps you're taking to adapt to this challenge?
Sure. Yeah, so when we purchased our farm in 2016, we brought out a local farmer to look at the soils with us and kind of assess their current state. And we do have some sandy soils on our farm. And one of the things she brought up was that we might have to have some concern about drought. But then our first year, we bought the land, and our first year of farming, it was one of the wettest years on record in our area. And, she was kind of like, oh, yeah, that was a strange one. I don't know what that's all about. And then the next year proceeded to be even wetter than that year. And by the third year, we were realizing that this is probably a trend and something that's going to continue to happen in our area. One of the things, that we've always focused on is soil health. And so, in a lot of systems, the worry of this increased rainfall and like bigger rainfall events would be worry about the loss of topsoil. But in our system, because we have perennial cover, we're not exactly worried so much about erosion. And, thankfully, that's something that, we are seeing some good water infiltration rates in our soil, but they do need to get better. And so through our soil health practices, we're hoping that that will increase and we won't have so much ponding. We are, we kind of manage our soil through adaptive grazing, and we do access some money through a state program called the Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program that is helping us improve our waterways and ditches and areas that might have high impact from the cattle, and that will help that water flow when there is increased rainfall. But one thing that we are also worried about from this increased wetness is parasite management in our livestock. And also the earlier thaws and, later freezing, these temperatures allows parasites longer life cycles. And so that's something that I think doesn't get talked about a lot or isn't in a lot of people's awareness, is that this is a concern I have. And, we've tried to breed for resistance to certain parasites, but if their life cycles are changing, this is something we're going to have to keep on top of and watching and checking to make sure that this isn't becoming a bigger issue for us.
It's a really fair point. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of the conversation around this space obviously is around soils, and in this case, pastures and so forth, and what we might do to make them more resilient. But obviously, we need to be looking at the impacts, on the livestock themselves. Ryan, continuing with this theme, I mean, we were talking just a few minutes ago about the fact that, in Colorado, even at this time of year, it can feel at times like winter, so forth. And so you have those normal kind of cycles, but we know that we're getting some climate-related weather shifts there as well, with sustained drought, wildfires, etc. And wondered if you could share with us effect that this has on livestock health, input costs, and what this really does to kind of stress on ranchers and their ability to kind of mitigate and manage these challenges.
Yeah, Rob, we're definitely in a arid environment, and most of our moisture would come from snow. Where I'm specifically at in northern Colorado, we are 10, maybe 12 inches a year in a good year of moisture coming. And so we really rely a lot of irrigation water for a lot of places around here. Our place specifically relies on aquifer water, pumping that out of our wells and being able to do that. I grew up in an area that received 60+ inches of moisture a year, and grass was ample. We were, piping water off of fields in some places. And so out here in Colorado and more arid environments, you really have to manage things delicately. When you don't get much moisture, the grasses that are out here on prairie land are much more fragile. And so you have to pay attention to overgrazing and being able to, to prevent putting too much pressure on certain areas of the pasture, which can lead to a lot of wind erosion. We have a lot of wind energy out here because there is a constant wind in this part of the state and in the high plains. And then also wildfires are a big concern. You hear a lot about Colorado and the high mountains. Through several years of low snowpack, water reservoirs have dropped. And then this year specifically, you're looking at Colorado as a big source of water for much of the western United States through the Colorado River Basin, and then much of the water going east comes out of the Colorado mountains as well. And so as that drops, we're looking at tighter restrictions on irrigation water for those farmers who do utilize that. And so with that, it comes into choices of, how are we going to be more selective in that water? And for cattle producers, there's already talk of, if we don't receive more rain this year for our pastures, how are we going to cull our herds and reduce our numbers here? And so several years of drought back to back can be very difficult on producers in this area. And that can be a huge mental strain as well. So talking about mental health when everything seems to be going wrong, several years of back-to-back tough weather, that can be tough. And I think the recent COVID pandemic, and being isolated with social distancing and not being able to have those conversations with our neighbors, with folks in towns and the school system and sporting events, that has made it even tougher because you don't have that opportunity to share those experiences and get that advice and just that opportunity to talk with your neighbors and peers like you have in past and recent years. So it's definitely a difficult situation and something that is growing throughout that. But that's all the more reason why we're having to pay closer attention to our grazing management practices and ensuring that even in drought years, we're not damaging the land so that when we do get rain and moisture again, we're able to come back, build back our herds and have good pastures for that.
Appreciate that. It's definitely a balancing act among all of those competing challenges there. But we'll just put a quick plug in through the work of National Farmers Union in conjunction with American Farm Bureau Federation, Farm Credit System. We have developed a number of farm stress training kits that is free to anyone who is looking for training on how to not only manage stress, but to help others and to identify it and to make connections to resources. And it certainly is applicable not only in the farm sector, but really to anyone. So I would encourage folks, if you're interested, to go to our website at www.nfu.org to look up links to those resources. Turning now to you, Andy, and on the processing end, certainly the big changes in weather and big storms have impacts on those in the processing sector. And just a few months ago, Texas and Oklahoma experienced a severe weather storm that shut down roads, utilities, major disruptions in the food supply chain. Can you elaborate on how these kinds of events can make it difficult to process meat and what disruptions mean from your point of view for those ranchers that you're working with, as well as those ultimate customers?
Sure. Yeah, and I think in that that question you asked about Oklahoma, you can include Arkansas in there. We suffered that as well. And it's funny, when I was a kid, and Ryan can probably speak to this as well. But in Arkansas, if you get an inch of snow, it could shut the world down, right? And we're just not equipped for it. So when you heard that as a kid, you got excited about it because you're going to get a day out of school and get to go outside and play in it. But as you get older, now owning processing facilities, when I hear that we're going to have a snowstorm, it's really, really concerning. And because there's a lot of challenges that come with that. The first thing that we start being concerned about is there going to be ice? Are we going to have power outages? Are we going to have issues with the water? Because if we don't have power, if we don't have water, then we can't operate. The next thing you automatically go to is, are the are the farmers going to be able to get their livestock or their poultry to the facility? It becomes really challenging for them to get to their livestock, to get it up to us to be able to process. Then you start worrying about the employees and if their safety to travel on it. You start worrying about if they can get there and make it to the plant, and the inspectors themselves, the USDA inspectors, if they're able to make it. You've got product that's in the facility. So if there is a power outage, not only could you not operate, but then you start worry about product temperatures and deviation there. And then you look at the outbound shipments. There's customers waiting. So can the truck arrive to get it? Can we get it processed and get it out to them? All those things are extremely stressful because for the farmer and the processor, and because you're dealing with a really highly perishable commodity, and we don't have as soon as that animal arrives, we're on the clock to get it out. And so as those issues arise, you have to get really creative to try to solve them. And there's not a lot of options. We don't have the ability to just push it off and wait until things get better or improve. We've got a product that has to be dealt with immediately. And so as we have to worry about the employee safety and product integrity, and then the farmers being able to get the product there, and then get it to the end user. There's the disruption across the board that comes from the farmer side and processing side. Then that also obviously is going to translate to the end user. And so that's where when you see those get disruptive, and the pandemic's a good example of that. When those get disruptive, then you're going to see shortages on the shelf.
Absolutely. And that's actually a great segue here to you, Anthony. And, the restaurant industry has obviously, like a lot of sectors, just been devastated by all the disruptions as a result of the pandemic. But obviously during the pandemic, some restaurants turned to outdoor dining as they attempted to kind of bring customers back in and open some business. But we know that in places like San Francisco, where you've opened restaurants, poor air quality from wildfires made outdoor dining also dangerous. Can you tell us more about this issue and what other kind of climate change related obstacles might be there for restaurants, including things like ingredient availability?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. There's no question it's been a disastrous year for restaurants, both with COVID and wildfires and all these challenges that we face. But by the same token, we've had a year where everyone is starting to really realize that there's this huge opportunity for agriculture to be a primary climate solution, and that in order for us to overcome some big structural problems, like improving land stewardship on hundreds of millions of acres, we need collective action. So we're not really viewing it from an operations standpoint anymore and like $1 per meal or trying to get somebody to like pay an extra $1 for a burger. It's more like trying to create a really big circular economy. And so the goal of our collaborations with state of California and city and county of Denver and Boulder, and expanding soon to the Northeast, are to scale change on millions of acres by aggregating a few cents per meal. And so just as one example, like a 1% fee added on California restaurants would have generated $970 million per year for carbon farming. So these are like pre-COVID numbers. These are huge, huge opportunities. And so we need like tectonic shifts in the whole food economy. This work is modeled after the progress already underway in the renewable energy industry. And so, applying those successes to farming. So instead of sending like $5 per month on your energy bill to improve the grid, trying to create a system where citizens can send a few cents per meal or purchase to improve the grid of food by funding cover crop planting, compost application, regenerative grazing, silvopasture, et cetera. So we're working with the conservation districts and cooperative extensions and other technical service providers to give these direct grants to farms and ranches as like a much bigger way to address climate change. Those, individual challenges, of course, are happening for all of us, but we're trying to go kind of at the systems level now.
Yeah, appreciate that. And, much like a couple of the other speakers have already mentioned, part of the challenges that we've been facing over the last year or so, whether it's pandemic related, climate change, et cetera, has also really created a lot of opportunity for education, for folks to really better understand some of the challenges in the food system, opportunities at the farm level for climate mitigation and support here. And it's a perfect opportunity here to kind of turn to this conversation to ways in which we can address climate change. Anthony, you just kind of walked through a couple of those, whether it's carbon markets, providing incentives for cover crops, a number of things. And I think we've all have recognized in a lot of these conversations that it's going to take a huge collection of tools out there, because every ranch, every farm, depending on where they are located, what they are producing has very unique needs, but they all have opportunities to be a part of the solution here. Hannah, on your operation, you're working to minimize your climate impact through these regenerative practices. Can you tell us a little bit more detail about what those practices are, climate benefits you've seen? You spoke a little bit about that with the flooding and so forth. But along with that, you spoke of soil health. Have you seen any additional kind of non-climate or non-direct climate benefits?
Yeah, I mean, first I just want to say I'm so inspired by Anthony's work. It's so awesome to hear about the big systems change thinking coming from a different sector. I haven't really thought about that much before, so I'm really excited about that. But so in terms of what we're doing, our main soil health practice is rotational grazing. And just for anyone who's not familiar, what we're doing is trying to mimic nature. So we're moving the animals every day or every other day to a new paddock. And when they do this, they're basically not allowed to overgraze the pastures. And when they're not allowed to overgraze, then there's more photosynthesis of the plant. And when there's more photosynthesis of the plant, that allows them to draw more carbon down out of the atmosphere and sequester it in the soil. And, we are monitoring this with soil testing. So we are able to see that we are increasing our soil organic matter over the years. And we can also compare pastures we've been able to graze more compared to those less. We can see the benefits are there. It's really improving quickly in the places that we've been able to hit harder. But then the ecosystem services are also equally important. And I think that's really important to the conversation too. These things don't happen in a silo. We're not just sequestering carbon, we're also improving the environment at large. And some of the things we see is, well, through the rotational grazing, we are breaking parasite life cycles. So I mentioned that as a problem, and increased wetness has increased that. But through managing our rotations, we're able to decrease that so we don't have to use so many dewormers. And there's also, worry about developing resistance to these medications that we do have available to us. But in terms of what I'm seeing on the ground, we have an amazing wildlife population. We have ground nesting birds. One that a lot of people talk about are bobolinks. And this is a ground nesting bird that has lost habitat as we've lost these grasslands throughout the Midwest. And we're prime zero breeding ground right now for bobolinks. They're coming out, and because we're rotationally grazing, we're leaving habitat for them to nest in that's not getting disturbed. And so, that's one great benefit of our practice. And then, another thing is we're not worried about weeds because we're grazing everything. And when you do rotational grazing, you're also kind of forcing the animals to clean their plate, is what kind of the people say. And so they're eating weeds that they might not if they were in a continuous grazing system. So we're not worried about pastures getting too weedy, but also what that means is there's more diversity out there. We're letting weeds grow because we're not worried about them. And so where a lot of people would be really concerned with thistles, for example, when I'm walking through a pasture that we haven't got to yet, every single thistle flower that I see has a bee on it. And I think that's really important to thinking about whole systems. It's we're not worried about eliminating things. We're really focused on creating more life. And that is what is creating resiliency. And And the last thing I'll say too is just like human happiness is better and impacted by these practices. Like, you know, I am out in nature, my son is out in nature interacting with the animals. And I think that's one big impact of regenerative agriculture that people also aren't thinking about, which is that like we're very disconnected from nature. And there is actually, I mean, maybe people can actually, this will resonate after the pandemic of like being at home, but being in nature is incredibly healthy for people as well.
Yeah, thank you. Nice point to end on there. Ryan, turning over to your perspective, obviously you spoke a little bit, not climate specifically, but you know, resource management, if you will, and the need to balance that with pasture management, make sure that you're not breaking down that pasture if you're overgrazing. But obviously, if you have any other kind of climate mitigation strategies that you guys employ on a regular basis, and if you could tell us a little bit about your experience from the renewable energy production side and farmers' opportunities there. I believe you've had some opportunity with solar panels, and maybe speak a little bit about some of the pros and cons of that sort of on-farm energy production.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've got kind of a mix of a lot of energy here in this part of the country. I mentioned, you know, wind energy is a big thing, kind of harnessing that and taking advantage of that in coexistence with production agriculture, whether it be in the middle of the crop field or cattle pastures. And then Colorado is known for having many, you know, upwards of 300 days of sun every year. And so solar energy can be a viable option. And so, you know, one way the ranchers have been able to implement and utilize some of that on our operations has been through water wells. And so utilizing solar panels to pump water, which can be a great advantage. So you can utilize that when needed, you know, covering in an area where you know, it takes 41 acres, you know, to graze cattle in some places because we've got to spread them so far out. You know, you may only come to certain sections, you know, a couple of times a year. And so solar panels work really great for that, being able to pump water when you need it. And that can reduce our, you know, our energy consumption through conventional means. But kind of the challenge of that is storage. So solar energy is great when it works, but when it doesn't, you know, it can be a little bit frustrating and needing to find some times for that. So you may need additional storage for the water. So if the water doesn't pump, you know, fast enough to keep up with all of the cows that are on the tank, you need tank storage to store the water. Also, you know, battery storage on a cloudy day. You know, this month we've been much cooler than average and had several days of snow. And so when we would normally have enough, you know, solar energy to power those wells, we didn't there for a couple of days, and the water wasn't, the solar panels weren't able to keep up with the water needs and requirements. And so definitely thinking about enough battery storage there, that can be a challenge on some of those cloudy and overcast days. And so I think it's a mix of kind of everything. And so, you know, as I go throughout day to day, I don't think, well, this is what I'm doing for the climate. I think a lot of, you know, myself and a lot of ranchers that I've worked with in this area is what are we doing for our environment to keep it better? And so, you know, is that our grazing management? You know, in this area, we only come to our pastures once or twice a year, 3 times. The third time would be in the dormant season. And so really we're measuring that of are we improving our forage stands, improving the moisture retention in the soils, the coverage that we have throughout that, and what are our wildlife populations? If you see more wildlife, that means you're improving, you know, the diversity in the operation, but also you're having healthy soils and healthy forage stands. And I think that was really evident when I was working with a lot of ranches up in the Yellowstone region of Wyoming and Montana. You'd see a lot of ranchers having to coexist with wildlife out there, whether they be predators or other grazing ruminants, such as elk that can carry diseases out there. And so you see a lot of this, you know, climate may not be the top of the thing that what we're thinking of. We're doing this for the climate, but how are we improving our environment and our operations that we're doing? And over the generations, you can see that take place. And I think a lot of producers, if we're going to be sustainable for years to come, we've got to be able to continue to make those improvements. So I think it's a lot of those little things that we do every single day that ladder up to being more sustainable over the years and being able to make those improvements.
Yeah, Ryan, I really appreciated the way you kind of phrased that. Is, you know, it may not be from the rancher's point of view that the climate solutions are exactly the label that they're using. but looking at climate solutions through the lens of ways to make their own practices more environmentally sound, and therefore as a business more sustainable into the future, certainly presents those opportunities that also have the climate benefits. So I appreciate that comment there. Andy, when we talk about climate mitigation potential of beef, we don't always talk about processing, but obviously there's some opportunities there. What are the ways that processing facilities are working to minimize their climate impact?
Yeah, I think that there's some low-hanging fruit there. You know, when Ryan spoke about some of the alternative cleaner energy sources, and I think that, you know, as we look at expansion, we've actually partnered with a local nonprofit, Heifer International, and they're here based here in Central Arkansas, and so we have been able to take advantage of some of the work that they're already doing. And we've been able to, you know, look at some of the, as we expand, look at some of these alternative options and how can we build facilities that have less of a impact on the environment. And so I think that's some of the lower hanging fruit, but there's a lot of different ways I think we can attack this. You know, as we go in and we look at buying machinery, we want to have as efficient of a machinery as we can. It makes, as Ryan said earlier, it makes good business sense to do that, but it also has less of an impact on the environment. As we're looking to source, you know, packaging materials or boxes, you know, as we look at the type of materials that we buy, that we're conscious of what kind of impact that they have on the environment. And then also as we're doing that, you know, we're working with right now, right at 300 businesses that are vendor partners for us, that we source materials, seasonings, whatever it may be from. And so we want to work with the right kind of businesses too. You know, there's opportunities. We want to support the kind of people that are getting it right. And as we look at seasonings and value add products that we're making inside our facility, we want to use clean ingredient lists. We want it to be, you know, a holistic approach to how we look at it, not just single dimensional, but we want to look at and see across the whole ecosystem, how can we make decisions that are the most impactful. I think that also, you know, a big thing is that for processing, is a lot of people in the pandemic, as terrible as it's been, that may be the one thing that it's done. It's highlighted the need for decentralized processing and having more processors out there. And I think that when you see the work that Hannah and Ryan doing, and Anthony as well, when you look at the work that they're doing and you look at the animals that are being raised, the link that most people talk about or gets overlooked is processing. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got over 2,700 farmers that we get the opportunity to process for, and they do a great job. Most of them do a great job in the regenerative ag space, and they're using lands like, for example, I'm in Clinton today, and we're at the foothills of the Ozarks. And so as you get into some of the mountains, they're using grazing cattle on land that wouldn't otherwise be able to be used for crops or anything else. And then they're making that replenishing that soil and some of the things that Anthony mentioned earlier. So what they need is access to markets, and the way to get that is through processing, so we can get their livestock into retail ready packaging so they can go to the end user. And so I think that's a part that a lot of time gets overlooked, but as processors are being highlighted right now, it's because of the fact that it's the link in the value chain that often is left out, but it's certainly necessary to be able to take that regenerative raised livestock and get it to the end user.
Yeah, a very fair point, and it's definitely one that we'll spend a little bit more time on, this idea of that link in the chain, as you put it, for processing, and a need to kind of decentralize that and the consolidation that we've had there. But first, Anthony, on this kind of solution, you touched on this earlier, but I'm hoping that we can expand on that a little bit, because, as we've discussed, climate smart agriculture has a lot of benefits for farmers and for the environment, but transitioning isn't always simple, and certainly it's sometimes expensive. Can you talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing to leverage the support of restaurants and diners to support these kinds of practices, and what results you've already produced from, what some of the goals are, when it comes to sustainable beef production, and what other steps are restaurants taking to help mitigate climate change?
Yeah, thank you. At the Perennial, we were serving beef from a carbon ranching pilot program, and Great Ranch Stumple Creek was doing regenerative grazing on 3,500 acres. And then they were part of this research pilot where they also applied compost on 350 acres. It was funded through the research part of it. And I think it was about a 1/4 inch of compost, so about 35 cubic yards per acre. And what they found after 5 years is that, 5 years and counting, is that that land, the 1/10 of the ranch with the compost, is taking in almost like 10 times more carbon than just the regenerative grazing. So that's, something like the equivalent of 1 million gallons of gas so far. So that's 1/10 of one ranch. In the US, there's 760 million acres of rangeland and pasture with cattle on it. So it's like almost literally a world-saving opportunity. And we'd be trying to get the consumer to pay an extra dollar and this sort of thing. And then after a while, we started to realize, like, geez, it costs like $600, $1,000 to add that compost. These costs, when the consumer pays the dollar, it doesn't necessarily translate into the rancher adding another square foot of compost onto the land or whatever, much less the rancher's neighbor looking at them and saying, like, cool, I'm going to take out a $500,000 loan from the bank and do some carbon ranching. And so we started to realize, like, we just needed a way to make direct change instead of just making choices within the system. We used to think about it as like operations and trying to get restaurants to lower their carbon footprint, like use lower carbon footprint ingredients. Maybe you would switch away from a feedlot beef or something. But what we started to realize also was just like, if that diner chose an Impossible Burger or a sustainably raised burger instead of a Cargill burger or something, it's not like Cargill produced one less burger. They just produced the same burger and shipped it to India or China. And so, like, really the change available to all of us is just to directly fund carbon farming in your backyard. And so our hope is to figure out a way to do that at scale, because I think consumers want that. And I think communities would benefit directly from that kind of local climate action.
All right, thank you. Picking up on the discussion just a minute ago from Ryan with the issue surrounding consolidation and competitiveness. Really in the pandemic, it's a number of those disruptions at that processing level that had enormous impacts for ranchers who couldn't either deliver their livestock on time, significant added cost, or in some extreme cases had to depopulate, suffering great losses. Obviously, that disruption also resulted in, for consumers, at times a lack of access to product. Ryan, let's start with you. In the US, it's been repeated a lot, but we have just 50 plants that slaughter and process about 98% of all of our beef, which is something that ranchers have been concerned about for a while. Not very many buyers out there. During the pandemic, we saw the worst case scenario, as we just talked about. Plants shut down, left ranchers with nowhere to send their animals. Markets went crazy. Can you talk about how this might make us more vulnerable to climate-related disruptions, and how more small and mid-sized processors could build more resilience into the system?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to a little bit of that. Being on several different finishing operations and working with several different cattle feeders of different sizes, that last March we definitely saw events unfold that were very historic and very disruptive to the supply chain. We saw a lot of cattle feeders that had cattle ready to go to slaughter and go to harvest, and that they had to hold on to them for, in some cases, a very extended amount of time, because there just was simply not the capacity for operational plants to be able to harvest those animals. And, I'd say when we're speaking of the consolidation issue, I think it is worth noting that we've gotten to the stage where we are because there are some good benefits. I think food safety is paramount. Today we don't worry about an outbreak like Jack in the Box that we had in the early 90s, and being concerned of all of those things. So doing things at scale definitely has its advantages that we can rely on, food safety or efficiencies. I'm here in a smaller yard and I may not be able to feed my cattle with, food byproducts, crop byproducts as efficiently as what some other feed yards at a larger scale may be able to do. And I think that definitely helps our efficiencies from a sustainability standpoint and being able to utilize those things and upcycling nutrients throughout the system. That being said, I think that the disruptions have definitely highlighted the opportunities for many small and mid-size plants and being able to harvest animals so that there isn't such a bottleneck when things happen like that, and we can be more flexible. We do finish cattle on our operation for local beef markets and local consumers, and being able to do that. And it's been a great challenge in being able to find harvest dates for a larger number of animals, because everyone wanted, to buy some freezer beef throughout this thing. And so I think being able to have the flexibility in those small and mid-sized plants would be great when those markets exist. We're close enough to Denver to be able to market a large amount of beef as we're able to get it processed. And so I think it's a good balance. I think it's good to have those small and mid-sized plants and harvest opportunities to help us be more flexible and provide local food sources for local markets, and being able to do that. But I think being able to have the opportunity for larger scale operations helps us in that food safety realm, but also in that food byproducts and upcycling those nutrients throughout the system. So I think it is good to have a good mix from one end of the spectrum to the other, because no one size fits all in those opportunities.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And, certainly it's going to take a combination on food system, as we really was driven home last year. Is a very complex, complicated system all across the country. Certainly, we'll probably turn to Andy in a minute about questions around food safety, because I don't think anyone wants to risk food safety at any point. And so at times, I know for processing, the challenge of putting in place the equipment, personnel, et cetera, in order to meet federal standards, for example, to open up additional markets can be very costly. And we'll turn to Andy for that in just a minute. But Hannah, staying at the kind of producer level, what are some of the challenges that you and other ranchers have faced due to this lack of regional processing infrastructure in a lot of places? And how could more local and small scale facilities help address those issues for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge has been like lack of flexibility, and obviously just even getting those processing dates. We were already before the pandemic scheduling our dates over 10 months in advance. And so it was already a problem. And then the pandemic just made it even more of one. And when you can't access the butcher when you need to, or you can't plan ahead, or, in this situation, it's like sometimes you're having to schedule these butcher dates before you even purchase the animals. So it makes all of those decision-making processes difficult. And, for us as direct, we're direct marketing our meat. So we also need the flexibility of a USDA processor in order to be able to, if we wanted to sell direct, say at a farmer's market, or sell individual cuts as opposed to custom processed. And so when there's a lack of available USDA processors, there's a lack of our ability to be flexible in how we're marketing and how we're selling. And so really it comes down to like the lack of processing is the lack of ability to grow our business. And really that's like a huge limiting factor, and is going to need to be a solution if more small farmers are going to be able to continue to grow their businesses and, farm regeneratively.
Yeah, and just to make sure, for anyone watching here and following along with the discussion and may not be familiar with the system set up out there for processing, generally speaking, when we talk about USDA inspected plants, those who have met the federally inspected label, the standards around that, are able to ship interstate, so they can ship anywhere they want. If you are a state inspected plant and one that does not have an arrangement, there are select states that have some arrangements for going across state lines. But for the most part, if you are not federally inspected, you're often limited to either within state or maybe even just if you have those direct markets, depending on the processing. So Andy, as we talk about this processing challenge, food safety issues around meeting those standards and so forth, building out more regional meat processing is much easier said than done. So in addition to what I may have mentioned, what challenges can you speak to those small and mid-sized processors and what they face when opening or increasing capacity? And do you have any suggestions on things that legislators, either at the state or federal level, could do to help them succeed?
That's a great question. And I think that there's a lot of different ways to go with this, but I think if we were just to highlight the three biggest challenges, is the build out cost. You're looking at the square footage cost being somewhere between $500 to $600 per square foot for a finished plant, and that's likely to rise with you see the steel cost and lumber cost rising, over here over 200%. And I think that as you see that number is likely to grow, and so when you start modeling that out and you start looking at it from a cash flow perspective and a profitability perspective, it gets really challenging to make that pencil out. And so, just one of the biggest barriers to entry is just being able to get a plant up and going in an affordable enough way to make it cash flow. The next thing is recruiting, retaining, and hiring employees. That's been a big issue, and it's been highlighted recently. And I think that there's a couple of things. I think that there's some movement now trying to form some training programs, but I think we've got to do a better job in the industry of being a destination employer, because you can put all the training programs together you'd like. If nobody wants to join those training programs or go to work in the industry, it doesn't help. And so I think that there has to be, one thing we're wanting to do, and one of the focus and mission of Cypress Valley and Natural State is to become a destination employer, because without that, it really doesn't matter if there's training programs available. And then the last thing you spoke of, that Rob, that was great, is that, you talk about the USDA side the regulatory side is difficult a lot of times for these small processors to come online. And so I think that, one thing that would help from that standpoint is that a lot of times when these rules are being made, they bring industry experts in, but none of them are in a mid-size or a small or very small plants. They don't have representation there. And so I think that a lot of time rules and regulations are made without representation from smaller facilities and smaller businesses. And I think that would be very, very helpful as the rules are being written, or as you're looking to pass legislation, to have people that are in that industry at the table and making suggestions. And I think that there's also, it's interesting, and I think Ryan and Hannah did a really good job of laying out some challenges, and I think they summarized it very, very well. I think it's a delicate balance as we grow. We've got to find ways to scale up, but not create too many microprocessors that it gets to be we overproduce, and we find that we're putting more businesses, or we're putting more processors out of business than we're actually bringing online. I think that we also need to look at supporting existing processors and trying to help them ramp up, as well as bringing on some local or new processors. So I think it's a delicate balance to watch that, to monitor it, and really understand what the demand is out there and what supply that we need, what needs to be met, and understanding, what exactly are the needs that need to be filled, so that we don't overproduce, because I think we have to be careful about that as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Anthony, I have one question here for you, a little bit about your work with Zero Footprint. And then I'll have one final question for everyone to kind of reflect on in terms of what is making you feel optimistic about the future of climate action from your perspectives. I wish we could kind of continue the conversation here, but we are wrapping up. I appreciate everybody joining us today. But Anthony, before we get to the closing question, right now, as I understand it, Zero Footprint is active in a handful of cities. How are you envisioning this model scaling up? And what role might local and state governments play? You mentioned some of the cities that you're working with, but could you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so we're active in San Francisco, Boulder, Denver, but really across the state of California and in Colorado, opening hopefully soon for applications statewide, maybe by the end of the year. And so I think the role that governments can play is, if you think about it, the thing holding back conservation efforts, climate efforts, et cetera, is just government budgets. If they had unlimited budgets, they would do a lot more good work. And so I think we simultaneously have this situation in society where like citizens really wish there was a way to take local climate action. Like they wish there was a way to do more than just kind of delay the inevitable and hope for politicians to make change. And so I think that's where carbon farming and regenerative agriculture is the most exciting opportunity, because we have that ability to just make direct local change and take local climate action. And so it takes from our view, sort of like these public-private collaborations to help establish the credibility and awareness and legitimacy that citizens could directly fund that as part of a circular economy and to kind of bridge rural and urban divides, but also really just to help scale up things like compost infrastructure and other things that will, kind of the fundamental tools of regenerative ag that currently don't even exist. So one thing in California that's amazing is that there's legislation that just passed last year, I guess, to radically shift organic matter diversion from, maybe about 10% statewide to like a 75% reduction in, organic matter in landfill. And so that's going to have this trickle down effect of creating like, millions and billions of extra tons of compost and things. And then it's up to all of us together to kind of figure out a way to get that onto farms and ranches as part of local carbon farming efforts.
Alrighty, and I might start with you, Anthony, for the final question. With all of the issues kind of discussed today, and obviously reflecting the wide diversification in the production cycle here for beef as the topic today, but across the food cycle, what is making you feel optimistic about the future of climate action?
What's optimistic is that beef and land management is a part of the solution. And if anybody has read kind of like some of the results from Project Drawdown, what's really optimistic overall is that climate experts are starting to realize we can solve the whole climate crisis. We can lower global temperatures. It's going to cost 1% of GDP each year. Let's just start funding local carbon farming.
Okay. Andy, from the processor's point of view, what's making you feel optimistic?
I think I'll just piggyback on what Anthony said there. I think that you see a lot of people that are doing some great things for the environment. I think we're optimistic and get excited about the opportunity to get to work with those farmers and producers that are doing that. And so I think that the more that we can get awareness and the more that people see the true impact and change it makes, I think that consumer education is going to get people really excited. And I think they're going to want to be buying from, Ryan and Hannah and those type of farmers. I think that it's something that you can certainly get behind and support, and you can see real impact and real tangible results. And so the part that we get to play in that gets me really excited.
Ryan, from the perspective of a rancher, what's making you feel optimistic about the future of environmental or climate action?
I think as the production community, we're getting more comfortable and better at telling our story, talking about what it is that we're doing. Even though a lot of us may not put a label to what it is we're doing, it may not always be labeled as regenerative ag or climate change or whatever it might be, but we're doing little things every day that ladder up to being more successful businesses, more sustainable businesses. And we're getting better at answering the questions from consumers and being able to share how that impacts our food supply. And so I look back at the progress we've made over the past decade, and I think we're continuing to improve and get better at that. So it really excites me that we're getting better at telling that story to the consumers and answering those questions about talking about what it is that we do every day on the land.
All righty, thanks. And Hannah, what is making you feel optimistic about the future?
Well, everyone else has mentioned things that I would say too, but I'll just add one more piece. I would say that at the federal level, the discussion about climate change by our policymakers, by the agriculture committees, the fact that, this is a discussion we're having now, and it's not something that we're avoiding, that there's an opportunity here to talk about this and to really come up with real solutions. That makes me optimistic.
Great. Well, once again, I thank everyone for joining us today. I really do wish that we had more time, but I'd like to thank our panelists, Hannah, Ryan, Andy, and Anthony, for sharing your expertise, your experience, and perspectives on this important topic today. I would also encourage anyone who wants to do additional follow-up to please reach out to us. National Farmers Union's website is nfu.org. We saw questions coming in. I saw some related to co-op model in this topic. We certainly have webinars that I would encourage you to seek out on our website on use of the cooperative model and how that can empower individual farmers and ranchers. Any of these topics, please reach out to us. We'd love to continue the conversation. So thanks again, everyone. Have a happy Earth Day. Take care.